Tobias George Smollett was a Scottish poet and author. He was best known for his picaresque novels, such as The Adventures of Roderick Random and The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle, which influenced later novelists such as Charles Dickens. His novels were amended liberally by printers. A definitive edition of each of his works was edited by Dr.O. M. Rack Jr. to correct variants. Life. Smollett was born at Dalkern, now part of Renton, in present-day West Dumbartonshire, Scotland. He was the fourth son of Archibald Smollett of Bonhill, a judge and landowner who died about 1726, and Barbara Cunningham, who died about 1766. He was educated at the University of Glasgow, where he qualified as a surgeon. It has been asserted by some biographers that he then proceeded to the University of Edinburgh but left without taking a degree. His career in medicine came second to his literary ambitions. In 1739 he went to London to seek his fortune as a dramatist. Unsuccessful, he obtained a commission as a naval surgeon on HMS Chichester and travelled to Jamaica, where he settled down for several years. In 1742 he served as a surgeon during the disastrous campaign to capture Cartagena. On his return, he set up practice in Downing Street and married a wealthy Jamaican heiress, Anne Nancy Lascelles. In 1747, she was a daughter of William Lascelles. They had one child, a daughter Elizabeth, who died aged 15 years about 1762. He had a brother, Captain James Smollett, and a sister, Jean Smollett, who married Alexander Telfair of Symington, Ayrshire. Jean succeeded to Bonhill after the death of her cousin Jermyn, Mr. Commissary Smollett, and resumed her maiden name of Smollett in 1780. They lived in St. John's Street off Canongate, Edinburgh, and had a son who was in the military. His first published work was a poem about the Battle of Culloden entitled The Tears of Scotland, but it was The Adventures of Roderick Random which made his name. His poetry was described as delicate, sweet and murmurs as a stream. The Adventures of Roderick Random was modelled on Le Sage's Gil Blas, and was published in 1748. Smollett followed it up by finally getting his tragedy, The Regicide, published, though it was never performed. In 1750, Smollett took his MD degree in Aberdeen, and also travelled to France, where he obtained material for his second novel, The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle, another big success. Having lived for a short time in Bath, he returned to London and published The Adventures of Ferdinand Count Fathom in 1753. He was now recognized as a leading literary figure, whose novels were published by the prominent London bookseller Andrew Miller. Smollett became associated with the likes of David Garrick, Lawrence Sterne, Oliver Goldsmith and Samuel Johnson, whom he famously nicknamed the Great Cham of Literature. In 1755 he published a translation of Miguel de Cervantes's Don Quixote, which he revised in 1761. In 1756, he became editor of the Critical Review. Smollett then began what he regarded as his major work, A Complete History of England, from 1757 to 1765. During this period he served a short prison sentence for libel, and produced another novel, The Life and Adventures of Sir Launcelot Greaves. Having suffered the loss of a daughter, he went abroad with his wife, and the result was travels through France and Italy. He also read The History and Adventures of an Atom, which gave his view of British politics during the 7 Years' War under the guise of a tale from ancient Japan. He also revisited Scotland, and this visit helped inspire his last novel, The Expedition of Humphrey, Kingka, published in the year of his death. He had for some time been a ailing from an intestinal disorder, and had sought a cure at Bath and eventually retired to Italy, where he is buried in the Old English Cemetery in Livorno, Italy. Monuments. There is a monument to his memory beside Renton Primary School, Dumbartonshire, Scotland, on which there is a Latin inscription composed by Dr. Johnson. The area around the monument was improved in 2002, with an explanatory plaque. After his death in Italy in 1771, his cousin Jane Smollett had the monument built in Renton in 1774. It comprises a tall Tuscan column topped by an urn. On the plinth is a Latin inscription written by Professor George Stewart of Edinburgh, John Ramsay of Octatar and Dr. Samuel Johnson. It is a Category A listed building. There is also a plaque to his temporary residence in Edinburgh just off the Royal Mile at the head of St. John's Street. This states that he resided here in the house of his sister, Mrs. Telfer, for the summer of 1766. A second plaque states that he stayed here occasionally, implying more than one visit, which may well be true if it was the house of his sister. Smollett is one of the 16 Scottish writers and poets depicted on the lower section of the Scott Monument on Princes Street in Edinburgh. He appears on the far left side of the east face. There is a street in Nice, Alpes Maritimes, France, named after him. Bibliography. 1746, Advice. 1747, Reproof, a satire, a sequel to Advice. 1748, Translator, The Adventures of Gil Blas of Saint-Hilaire, published anonymously, translated from the original L'Histoire de Gil Blas de Saint-Hilaire by Alain René Lesage. 1748, The Adventures of Roderick Random, published anonymously. 1749, The Regicide, or James I of Scotland, a tragedy. 1751, The Adventures of Peregrine, Pickle, published anonymously. 1753, The Adventures of Ferdinand Count Fathom. 1755, Translator, The History and Adventures of the Renowned Don Quixote, translated from the original Spanish of Cervantes. 1756, A Compendium of Authentic and Entertaining Voyages, published anonymously, non-fiction. 1756, editor and one of the writers, The Critical Review, or Annals of Literature, a periodical published semi-annually from this year until 1790. 1757 to 1758, A Complete History of England by David Hume, in 4 volumes, with Smollett adding his own continuation of the history of England, published from 1760 to 1765, as an additional volume, non-fiction. 1757, The Reprisal, or The Tars of Old England, a comedy, anonymously published, a play performed on the 22nd of January. 1760, The British Magazine, a periodical published in 8 volumes. Volumes 1 and 2 include the first publication of Launcelot Greaves. 1761 to 1765, The Works of Voltaire, an English translation of Voltaire in 35 volumes, which Smollett edited with Thomas Franklin. 1762, The Life and Adventures of Sir Launcelot Greaves. First edition as a book, originally serialized in the British Magazine from January 1760 to December 1761. 1766, Travels through France and Italy, non-fiction. 1768 to 1769, The Present State of All Nations, published in 8 volumes, non-fiction. 1769, The History and Adventures of an Atom. 1771, The Expedition of Humphrey Kingka, radio. The Expedition of Humphrey Kingka was made into a radio series, with 3 one-hour episodes, dramatized by Von Antrobus, starring Stuart McLaughlin as Kingka and Nigel Anthony as Matthew Bramble.